Hey everybody, it's Paul with reporting live from my sofa. How are you today? I'm doing pretty good. We are going to be discussing Day 9 in the Rosenbaum trial, or better yet, as we can call it now, the Oh my god, what am I watching trial. Today we're probably just going to name this episode Oh No She Didn't. And y'all already know what I'm talking about if you've been watching it. And if you haven't been watching it, go on, get some popcorn, pull up next to me on the sofa, and without further ado, let's review. Okay, so Day 9, the Rosenbaum trial, this is turning into a you-know-what show. We're going to go over some key points of the testimony. The biggest thing we're going to be talking about today is the medical examiner's testimony, as well as how the defense interacted with her, we shall say. Now, there were other people that investigated. You can see I'm reading my notes. There were other people that testified, so we'll look at the defects investigator who got up there. Now, she met with Millie and the Rosenbaum. She basically is describing the investigation that she did. She, had to have Millie undress and examine these things, the bruises and whatnot, get her story from it. She went to Miss Banks' house a couple of times to look at the hole that the child fell into. She noted about the back door being blocked, things of that nature. Now, essentially what she ended up saying was the case was substantiated as physical abuse and neglect for Layla, and the case was substantiated as physical abuse for Millie. Now, the defense gets up there, and first of all, the defense argues that she doesn't want the defects worker to be able to say what they founded the results to be. She's basically like, no, we don't need to hear that. Da, 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 da. And I'm gonna try and hold off some commentary about the defense and stuff until we get a little further in. I'm going to try. So then the defense is showing pictures of the house, and she's like, well, did you walk in this area? Did you look in this area? Did you walk in this area? Did you actually go in there, or you just stand from back here? Which part of me was like, yeah, why didn't you at least walk? Because honestly, looking at the areas they're talking about, I'm like, where's the hole? I mean, you can just look and see. But the defense's job, as much as we don't like it, is to find any little loophole. That's the only hope they have. And so she's like, well, isn't this a hole in the fence they could get out of? And isn't this that? And da 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 da. And that's what her job is. So the defense asks the witness, who's the investigator, if she met with the Lamberts, and says, did you discuss Miss Banks with her? And then the defense is like, well, what did she say? And thank God the state objects and for hearsay or whatever. But when I'm sitting there watching it, I'm like, okay, so the defense has objected to every slight bit of hearsay, and the state stops and they're like, okay, without telling us what somebody said, do this. Well, then the defense sits here and tries to just walk the witness right into a blatant hearsay thing. It has to be told, and it's these tactics that cheapen the defense. We all understand that everyone has their right to a fair trial. This is a right we all have. I mean, we want this. We get it. Are these tough questions that the defense is asking? Absolutely. Are they necessary? I mean, some of them I don't think are. But, some of it is like, well, let's look at all options. Until we got to the medical examiner, that pretty much cleared the plate for me. But it's these tactics that the defense is using and her attitude. And we'll get to her attitude that really showed here in a minute. But it's those type things of I have to dissect all of the evidence that is saying one thing with cheap little, that's a hearsay thing, and you shouldn't say this, and well, let me try and sneak one in here. And it's just, it's not working. So I don't think. I'm hoping the jury is seeing through that. So let's continue. Also, what happens during this is they go back and forth over, this whole aspect of the hearsay thing. The jury's taken out, and essentially what the defense is trying to do is she says, she's trying to get someone for impeachment, and she's essentially saying, well, this person said this, but when this person testified, they said that this person didn't say this. And so I'm trying to get them for an impeachment. Well, I'm sitting here and I'm just like, and this is what the defense does. First of all, this is 4 years old. And so if you notice when she does things, she puts words into it. It says, and almost confuses the witness to be like, well, I don't know. Well, okay, sure. Them not knowing that she's going to come back and say, yeah, but this person didn't confirm that, so you're lying. That's impeachment. And again, it's this cheap tactic that probably works. I mean, if you've read the thing, I mean, she supposedly has gotten all these killers and rapists and baby abusers and people off of their charges, which is a whole other thing in itself. So, but again, it's this tactic that I'm just like, really, instead, why don't we look for the truth in the matter? Ask these tough questions and get to the truth of it. But let's stop with this, just being disrespectful is what I consider it to be. So I want to spend the majority of time talking about the medical examiner. Now, real quick, we'll talk about a psychotherapist that was up there testifying. Basically, it's saying that they studied the tapes with Millie, describes how people and children, especially for this case, can process trauma, how we can lock certain things away, and talks about how that trauma can be unlocked at certain points. And they said that they essentially believe what Millie had to say. She did say, and this is for the state, that she did find there were some questions that were leading, but with the whole context of everything, she was basically like, well, no, because all this stuff already added up. This is already said before the leading questions. All this evidence corroborates with one another, so it didn't make it a biased situation, in her opinion. And so, but essentially, this is going into it like, well, why didn't so-and-so say this at this time? And then when you start dissecting the psychology, the science behind, well, this is how we lock things away and how a memory can be triggered and this, that, and the other. So I found it interesting, and it did play, obviously, a role in how some of this information was divulged. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the medical examiner. Which every one of you were like, oh my God, go watch it, Paul, go watch it, Paul, go watch it, Paul. And so I started watching it late last night after our live, and then I got up early this morning and started watching it, and I was fired up over breakfast. I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. So let's go into a few things with that. First of all, just her credentials, I was like, oh my God, like, hi, my name's Paul. I like Netflix and sitting on the sofa. I mean, she was so accomplished. I was just like, oh my gosh. Now, she also testified at the McNabb trial. So, she's versed in doing this. And I mean, the numbers she threw out there for how many cases that she's testified in is astounding. So I very much trust what she has to say. Now, a huge amount of her testimony is the science of bruising and basically explaining how bruises work, how the autopsy process works, the things that they do. So basically saying, you know what, if we want to get, now she says we can't get an exact age on these bruises, but by being able to basically pull the skin back and look at how the thing, it looks underneath, we can get a general time frame. But she's very careful to say, we can't look at it and say, that happened, 30 minutes ago. But we can say, you know what, basically for this testimony, for the purpose of it, is they are establishing these bruises did not come from CPR resuscitation. These bruises were there. So, and that's a key element that's going to come up in a little bit. Now, one thing, and I'm just going to say some stuff that jumped out at me, and this stuff will play a role in when the defense comes up. But first of all, the jury and everyone in that courtroom is having to look at these horrific autopsy pictures. Because at this point, the body is just, it's a piece of science at this point. And so she was saying that, they had to shave Layla's head. And she said that usually for an autopsy, they shave like around the wound or whatever. But because Layla's was so extensive, they had to shave her entire head. I mean, one thing that's prevalent with the medical examiner's testimony is you see the level of trauma and suffering and abuse and injury that Layla had. I mean, her last, I don't know, however long, few weeks, I mean, whatever, were not pretty. And the day that she died was not a pretty day. See, I'm just going to go over some significant findings that she had. Numerous bruises from head down to legs. Most prominent bruises on the back. And I mean, she described them like being from the neck down to the lower back area. Internal injuries for the liver, the pancreas, mesentery injuries, internal bleeding, injuries beneath the scalp. I mean, it just goes on. When she's going through all this, you're just sitting here like, I mean, this child was tortured. I mean, it's awful. says that Jennifer's description of what was happening to Layla as not choking, but rather a seizure. So that's the thing. So Jennifer described these motions of this is what's going on. And this medical examiner essentially went into, no, this is what was going on. She was seizing. And so these actions, which she said to the layperson, could be confused as choking, but this is actually a seizure. So she said there was significant trauma to the stomach area. And she said that the death, it's something like the way that she died, the death is not immediate. So it's like, okay, so she suffered, which is why she went into the seizure and all this. She said that she lived for about an hour before death. So about when these, which were the injuries like to the internal organs took place, she probably was alive for like another hour. Now, she says, the medical examiner says she did not find any food particles in the trachea. This will come back. The stomach contents were very well digested, so she basically was like, I don't know what they were. She couldn't identify the specific food, and she said that usually if one eats soon before death, they can identify the food. So essentially, this whole thing of, because remember, it's pointed out to us, that she's sitting here eating, and all of a sudden she starts choking, and then she's dead. Well, no, she hadn't been eating for a hot minute. So, that's where these timeline, and the science usually doesn't lie. Now, she did say that some of the bruises on her are expected in children her age, like the knees and the forehead, while other locations like the groin, the entire back, they don't normally encounter or expect to see this. Now, I'm just going to throw out a couple of numbers here real quick. Just on her head and neck, she had 22 injuries. 7 injuries on her right arm, 5 injuries on her left arm. That's not the back, the groin, the leg. I mean, that's just that, y'all. So you start getting these numbers and you're like, what happened? The thymus was bruised, the liver's laceration, the pancreas was split in two. I mean, y'all, this girl was beat to a pulp. Again, talks about the science of the bruises and how basically it's all done to show that these bruises did not happen moments before she died. These had been there. She says point blank range, death and these bruises and all these injuries did not come from CPR, the Heimlich maneuver, any of that stuff. It did not come from that. Now let's talk about the defense. Their cross. The defense starts attacking. It's called Rome. I believe it's like the report of medical examiner or something like that. I don't know for sure what it is, but they abbreviate it with Rome, and it's a report that they do. And the defense starts going in to pick little pieces like this apart. Now, again, remember, the medical examiner testified for like a long time, like a couple of hours, if not 2 hours plus. I don't think the defense was up there for maybe 15 minutes questioning her. These people who have the most science and stuff, she did. I mean, she went head to head with the defense, and the defense put her in her place. The defense went head to head with the medical examiner, and the medical examiner put her in her place, I feel. But so she starts off trying to, attack these findings in the paper, and she's going, basically trying to paint a picture that her findings were biased by essentially saying, did you meet with, the family beforehand, or did you get all this information before you did this? And so the medical examiner is very calm, very even keel, and always addresses the jury and explains in full detail so that they have a completely clear picture of how process A works and process B works, and this definition works. I mean, she's an amazing witness. She asked, did you go see the Rosenbaums before the autopsy? Absolutely not. That's completely out of character for us. Then she goes into this aspect. What did the coroner say what was in the sink? She doesn't recall because this is bizarre to her. Did you see any photographs of the chicken and the drain? No. Are you aware that chicken was in the drain? So essentially she's going with this whole thing of, Jennifer said there's chicken in the drain because that's where the kids spit it out. And, y'all are just horrible for not documenting this. And it's a reasonable doubt thing that she's trying to throw in there. And so then she says, well, what would you do if that piece of chicken had come? Wouldn't you analyze it? And for bile, and the medical examiner is kind of like, come again? And she's like, wouldn't you be interested to know? And this is what the defense does. Instead of just saying, because some of us could have wondered that too, would you analyze the chicken for bile? She has to add stuff to it. Wouldn't you be interested to know that? And first of all, I keep saying this, the medical examiner is like, no, well, first of all, bile's in the stomach, so if she choked on chicken, there would be no bile there. And the defense kind of walks away from that a little bit and goes in the whole thing of, well, wouldn't you be interested in that? And she's like, it's not a matter of me being interested in it. You know, the defense is trying to make her look incompetent, like, oh, so you just wouldn't care, you just let it go. And she just can't do it, though, because the medical examiner is really good. Then she goes into, like, why didn't she? She's saying something like, you didn't photograph the neck because you knew that the defense wouldn't be able to go back over it. And she's like, there was nothing about the neck to photograph. The trachea. She was like, there was nothing in there. There was no reason to. And there's several other body parts that I didn't photograph. You know. So again, the defense is going for these little cheap tactics. They're cheap tactics. So then she keeps doing these little cheap tactics, like about a scar. She'll put a photo up there and be like, and what about this injury? Mind you, the child has, just 22 in her head, but we're going to pick, this one little one right here. Well, you didn't identify that, so you don't know how to do your job. And she starts talking about, like, the scar, and she's like, basically says something to the effect of, how would you recognize a scar? And the medical examiner is so poised, so educated, so classy, and she's just like, I think everyone in here can recognize a scar, layperson or not, and just goes on and gives the definition of a scar. So then the defense is trying to insinuate that the autopsy she picked, she was like, well, you could have done this with a razor or whatever when you were shaving the head. And she's essentially like, well, there's no blood flowing, so this wouldn't have happened and that wouldn't have happened. But again, I'm looking at it, I'm like, really, this child is literally beat to a pulp. And you're going to point to one little thing and say, well, that could have come from a razor. I mean, that's where you're almost embarrassed. I am. You're almost just like, just stop. Just stop. So this is my thing with that. So the defense is completely just trying to make her look like she's shady, she's this, she's that, and in turn, the defense is making themselves look like that. And she also goes into this whole thing where she's like, well, you couldn't eliminate this or that or whatever. And again, she has to reiterate her definitions. I've already testified to this. I do not believe that I exclude CPR and the Heimlich maneuver. That did not cause this. Goes over and over, and the defense just tries to twist it around so many times. At one point, she says, did a scar predate when the Rosenbaums had the child? And the medical examiner asks, what's the dates? And the defense says, in the nastiest tone, I'm the one asking the questions here. Y'all, I wanted to come up out of my seat. I was sitting here like, you have got to be kidding me. The state objected, and the judge agreed, and then she had to tell them the date. At which point she said, no, this would not have happened outside this date. These injuries happened while they were under the Rosenbaum's care. So let's just stop right there with that. This is the tactic that they are using. So she is sitting here. She's not upset. The defense, she's not upset. She's not this or that. It's a bullying tactic. She knew that the information was not going to look good, and so she's going to bully them. I'm the one asking questions. Don't you question me. And luckily the judge is just like, are you crazy? That's the most logical question. Why would you do that? Well, because she knows it's going to look bad. She was hoping that they would back down. They didn't say anything, and they did. And then they give this answer of, no, these injuries. She made it look even worse. Nope, these injuries all happened while they were under the care of your clients, who you say didn't do this. So this is the thing. The defense is trying to pick these. It's very hard to go up against this woman, in my opinion, the medical examiner. The defense is trying to pick words like, did you palpitate the legs? And she's looking at him like, yeah, I had to touch her. This is a very intelligent medical doctor sitting here using medical terms, thinking in this way. And then you have this grimy defense attorney, and I'm sorry, I don't know her in personal life, but after today's stuff, I'm like, grimy is the only word I can come up with. Just doing these cheap lowball tactics and throwing doctor words around that don't really even make sense. And you can tell that the medical examiner is being nice about it, and not being the rude one, because she probably is thinking, who is this idiot? Why is she even... At one point she said, when she was asked something, she said, that question doesn't make sense. I'm not answering it. It's just... her tactics, not only did the medical examiner expose through science the level of injury, it also helped to expose even more so the defense's tactic, which is just, it's smoke and it's parlor tricks. So for that, I was glad, and I was also glad this medical examiner held her own. I mean, kudos to you. I mean, I just loved her. So then, and I'm going to make another video about this with the charges, because then after the fact, so that all happens, the state gets up there and they, they come out with their stuff, which is exactly what you would expect, which is, what would it look like if you nicked a patient on the head and da-da-da-da-da. So then the defense wants to basically have the charges against Joseph dropped. My opinion is that she's sitting here like, yeah, Jennifer, honey, you're both sinking. you're both sinking, honey. The cook and the musician and the captain are all jumping off right now. But she's essentially saying like, well, we don't have evidence because the state rested. We don't have evidence for A, B, and C against Joseph. Well, of course, all this was denied. When they start reading off the list of charges, y'all, your mouth is on the floor. It was a powerful ending. Now, I've heard some people say, well, why didn't they open with this and why didn't they open with that? This is the last thing next to closing statements that we heard. So that's going to stick, in my opinion, the heaviest. Now, another thing that was going on during this whole instance of, the defense trying to get the charges dropped is they brought up, for example, and let me find it here, a situation of, Joseph wasn't home, and, the charges about this going on, apparently they were applying icy hot to the bruises and stuff, and the defense is essentially saying, well, that would be a natural reaction to do to a child. He didn't know that Jennifer was doing this or whatever, if that was allegedly the case. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, you're trying to get up here after looking at those pictures of that girl on a slab and try and sit here and say that your client was putting icy hot on those bruises, trying to say he didn't know that was going on in his household. How stupid do you think we are? I mean, if I was that judge, and I mean, I get it. I mean, this is me talking from the sofa here, Well, if I was him, so I get it. I am not that judge. I'm not these lawyers. I haven't walked in their shoes. I would be insulted at this point. And again, she's covering her butt. It is her job to do this. I get that. It is her job to try and cover her butt every step of the way. But after you hear that and then you hear all these charges reeled off, you're just like, my God. This poor child suffered so much. I mean, can you imagine the pain she was going through? I mean, it gives me goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps. This poor kid. So, anyways, y'all, this has turned into a long video. I apologize, but I was just like, oh my God. So I hope y'all are doing well. I hope this video finds you well. Be sure to check out the podcast. I've been talking with Awen from Toxic Bliss podcast a lot about this case. The links are in the description down below. Make sure if you want to hang out with me that you do the dinner bell after you subscribe so that you'll know when I'm in YouTube land to hang out. I hope y'all are doing well, and I hope you have a lovely, lovely rest of your day, evening, weekend, whenever this video catches you. And I shall talk to you soon.